everyone. This is Sanjeev Iyer welcoming you to IIMChat. Those of you who attended the previous one, you know that we've taken IIMChats virtual in keeping with what's going on around the world. Before I get started with the event proper, you might have seen the screen that had some housekeeping instructions. Basically, if you want to ask any questions, you can use the Q&A feature that's available. Chat function is not available. So those questions you can post, you can vote on the questions, you can see what the questions are, and so on and so forth. And subsequent to the event, if you want to give us some suggestions, feedback, or whatever, you can write to secretary@iimpactglobal.org. So with that, let me get into the event itself. So we are, in fact, privileged to have two of our most distinguished alumni in conversation today. So we have High Commissioner Jawed Ashraf, who should be known to pretty much all of us here in Singapore. So he represents India in Singapore, if you will. And the extraordinary energy that he's put into community engagement. There is no part of the community segment that has been left untouched by him. And the other thing that most of us, of course, know is there is no topic in this world that he cannot speak with extreme amount of insights and knowledge, and he speaks without notes. So welcome, Jawed, to IIMChat. And the person who's going to have the conversation with him is Piyush Gupta. So when we talk of professionals in Singapore, corporate professionals, Indian professionals for that matter, any professional here in Singapore, Piyush really symbolizes success. He is the icon when it comes to that. He also is my go-to person for pretty much anything that we needed when it has come to IIMPACT. So extremely helpful in bringing the IIMPACT journey to where it is today. Of course, you would have seen Piyush in the in-conversation format. He did that with Prime Minister Lee, he did it with the DPM Heng Swee Keat, and the last one with Minister Chan as well. So welcome, Piyush, to IIMChat, because you've been in plenty of these as well. So as I said earlier, both of these are really distinguished alumni of the IIM alumni fraternity. Both of them also, by the way, happen to be St. Stephen's as well. So there is some more common background here that I thought I'll share with you. So this is definitely going to be an extraordinarily interesting conversation between the two of us. So with that, without further ado, let me hand it to Piyush and Jawed. Welcome again. Piyush, take it away.
All right, thanks Sanjeev, and thanks Subra. I think Sanjeev set it up well. I've been overseas away from India now some 30 plus years. And over the years, I've come across several Indian ambassadors, high commissioners across the system. And I have to confess that what Jawed brings to this job is unique. His energy level, his insight, and his capacity to be able to make impact is actually quite unparalleled. And I want to start this conversation with actually counting two incidents before I dive into how I'm going to frame the conversation. The first incident actually is very recent. I called Jawed yesterday so that we could have a quick chat about what we wanted to discuss. He didn't have time for me. He was in office, and I asked him, so what are you doing? And he said, I'm being ground handling staff for Air India. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, we're trying to repatriate lots of Indians back. There are 5 flights going. And we just need to make sure that we have the rosters, we get the names, we're getting the right people to the right city. So I said, why does it need the High Commissioner to be involved with this? And then he told me the minutiae involved. It is mind-boggling. Each state has its own requirements. You got to make sure that people understand they're going to go into 2 weeks of quarantine. They have to make a choice between the kind of quarantine they want, whether it's 5-star or 1-star. And the list keeps changing because as soon as somebody finds out that they're going to quarantine, they drop off the list, and then you got to replace them with somebody else because you don't want to send an empty plane. And so he was doing this all of yesterday till late night. In fact, right now, he's just come back from the airport after seeing the process and perhaps a flight off. So that speaks on the one hand to his level of engagement in the minutiae and the detail being there for the Indian community. But the second episode I want to narrate is actually at the other end of the spectrum. So about 5-6 years ago, the RBI allowed foreign banks to apply for subsidiary licenses in India. And no other foreign bank was interested, DBS was, and so we dutifully put in our application. Now, for reasons unknown to us, perhaps some differences between Delhi and Mumbai, that application languished for the longest period of time, years. And in those years, I tried my best to push that application along. I put it on Prime Minister Lee's agenda. I spoke about it to PM Modi. I put it on the agenda of the finance minister. And at the end of 3 years, I was pulling whatever hair I have left out because I made no progress. Till I approached Jawed. And Jawed said, look, you got to understand how to handle these things and how to handle India. You leave it to me and I'll help you shepherd this through. And true to his word, within months, he was able to help me unjam that roadblock. Now, this capacity to understand business requirements and to make impact at that level is what I have referred to as truly unique. Very few people from foreign policy, from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, have this capacity to reach into the insides of the Indian bureaucratic system and make things happen. Jawed has that amazing capacity. And so as Jawed moves on after 4 incredible years of impact in Singapore, moving on to Paris, which I'm sure he might talk about later in the conversation, it's just very appropriate for us to spend some time trying to understand what makes this man and try to figure out some sense of his own life. So to do that, I'm going to break this whole conversation into 4 segments. In the first segment, I'm going to talk a little bit to Jawed, have him talk to us about his years till he actually got to the foreign service, which is school and college and Ahmedabad and some choices that he made and so on. In the second section, I want to talk a little bit about his actual foreign policy and his Prime Minister's office experience. There's some interesting insights we can glean from there. In the third part, I want to delve a little bit into Singapore and how he feels about the Singapore stint at the end of 4 years. And then finally, I'm going to throw it open to the Q&A. So if you keep your questions coming, I'll just dive into that and see what else is on people's minds so we can take care of that and address that. So if we can just dive right into the first part, Jawed, you were, a man of many parts. As Sanjeev said, it's incredible to me, the range of your actual interests. And I was trying to write them down here. So histrionics, theater, public speaking, filmmaking and photography. You've written done a fabulous photography book on Nepal, for example. Nature, hiking, the arts, music, cricket. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, your breadth and range. And so it might be interesting to all of our listeners and audience to get a sense for your life. You grew up in Patna, you went to St. Mike's. So what caused you to develop this range of activities? And perhaps a little bit of a chronology. So, how did you get from Patna and how did you get all the way to the decisions you made? So all yours.
Oh my God. First of all, thank you very much. That was way too generous an introduction, both from Sanjeev and you. And I think that the numbers that we have today is really on account of the star in our midst, which is Piyush, a great example and a great inspiration, not just for IIM community here, but also for all of Singapore. And the Indian community, and not just because of your professional achievements, I have to say, but because I watched you engage the community, engage Singapore, contribute to it beyond your professional capacity, and always find time to speak to youngsters who are always so eager to listen to you.
Actually, Jawed, let me tell everybody, the scratching each other's back was not part of a setup.
No, I know, but I'm sure that a lot of people who've tuned in today have done so because you were there, as also Sanjeev and Subra. Again, I mean, extraordinary people making enormous contributions beyond their professional lives to the lives of IIM community, to the Indian community, and also to Singapore and Singapore-India relations. Some of all that we have done here in the past 3.5 years or so would not have been possible, really, without this unstinting support, ideas, and commitment that we've received from all of you. So I'd like to really thank each of you for what makes this place so special, and is also a window into what India's capabilities can be and is. But, I mean, I can talk about my life. I'm sometimes tempted to say, should I invent or edit my history to make it more interesting? But it isn't, I mean, very ordinary life. I went to a Jesuit school in Patna, which has now 160, 70-year history. Grew up in a family that had, my father was, of course, a professor, he was a mathematician, did his research in nuclear physics and shock waves and so on and so forth. But most of my family was in the services, in government, in armed forces, etc. So this was always something, and particularly growing up in a state like Bihar, it was always at the back of one's mind. It was in school, we did all that everyone does in school. I wasn't particularly very serious about studies. There was a lot of cricket, tennis, theater, elocution, extempore speech contests, and variety of other things. Actually, at some stage, as I was once telling you, Piyush, my principal, who was an American Jesuit, wanted to send me to the United States to do a course or do a professional course in drama. And he had a private conversation with my parents, and both agreed that, and of course, like good middle-class families, my parents told him, let him complete his BA. They said, well, he won't be interested in it afterwards. He was probably prescient, understood me better. But they agreed they wouldn't discuss it with me till I had actually graduated from college. So there were different kinds of interests. Went to St. Stephen's College because my brother was there. My uncle, who was like my maternal uncle, who was like a mentor to us, had studied there when we were kids. All his friends that I knew in Patna had gone to St. Stephen's. So that was the normal course for us to take. And when you come to college, of course, you look to stay in residence, and then you do what your marks enable you to do, which is to do economics. Sometimes I look back and say, should I have read history, which seems to be just as interesting, and perhaps when I look back, perhaps more. Then, like all of us, you want to write the CAT exam and get into IIM because, hey, you've done economics, everyone is doing that. And it gives you a sense of security. We grew up in India where this was the principal consideration for all of us growing up, is to be able to get a job. There was, by the time I left school, of course, I had dropped almost everything that I was doing, especially stopped playing cricket, which I has to do quite seriously, and almost stopped doing theater, but continued with, debating and public speaking to whatever extent I could. And then, of course, it was IIM. When I reached there, as my first day, the professor asked me, we had this, all of us had this sort of advisor. He asked me, why are you here? So I said, I don't know. So he actually said, it's a good answer for a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old to give. So I said, look, I really don't know, but I think there will be security down the line. After I graduated, was like, what next? There was tossed between trying to do a PhD, in which I was, and I had a passage to the US to an Ivy League college. But then I fell sick with jaundice. I was in bed for 8 months or more. Didn't feel like doing anything after that for 4 or 5 months. And then started thinking of various kinds of things, including, I actually went with a friend of mine and talked to someone who was a producer and said, can we make films? And he looked at us and laughed us out of his office. But there was always at the back of the mind that, interest in international affairs, politics, public policy, governance issues. And so that led me eventually to the path I took. And again, there was this big dilemma: should I take the foreign service or should I take the administrative service? And I think that was one of the few decisions I never regret. So that's how I am here today.
That's fascinating, Jawed. You did do a couple of years with Tata Economic Consultancy.
So that's where I joined when I left the campus. And I was very intrigued, actually. It was one of a kind, they give you a profile before you join. And it had all the elements of combining management, tools, techniques with public policy goals. And we were talking about, there was this project at that time on Sardar Sarovar Dam, doing a socioeconomic analysis and relocation, dislocation. There were many other projects of that nature. But I think as in many things, and particularly at that point of time, I feel that there was a huge gap between stated intentions and what we were actually doing on the ground. But the learning experience was enormous. And I think in my initial years, learning experience also in terms of, I must say, in business and understanding finance and corporate behavior, because there were a lot of these projects related to that. And in fact, between writing the exam and going to Missouri in September, we had about 8 months. I actually helped a company do, it's a small company, do a public issue of shares. And this, by the way, is 1990 when we were actually clamping down. Get a loan, which included even negotiating with KfW in Germany. But when I joined the service, this is exactly when reform started in India, with 1991 opening up. And I was posted, to Frankfurt, which was considered a European hub for business and investment. And I spent many years there and in Berlin to start with, doing a lot of presentations to boards. So
Jawed, before we dive into that part of the career, I just wanted to you to recount one incident you've told me. So when Jawed got to college, I asked him, did you carry on doing all of your theater? You know, Stephens is known for Sheikh Sock and debating. And he said, well, I got a little lazy, but I did continue the speaking circuit. And so I said, did you then take part in the Mukherjee Memorial, which is the premier debating competition in college? And so he had an interesting story to tell me. I mean, he said, I attempted to in my final year. So you want to tell us about it, Jawed? What was the proposition before the House and what happened?
So, you know, the debating circuit in Delhi University was a bit like tennis circuit. You know, you go around, debate in various places, you made some money. If you came first, second, and third, but MUKMEM was like the Wimbledon. You know, it didn't matter whether you never got money, but you just were just happy to win it, or just happy to get the first two positions. In my second year in college, I was to debate, but then, you know, somebody who was in third year, a good friend of mine said, look, I mean, you know, this is my last chance. So I said, yeah, that makes sense. You do it, I'll do it next year. So the following year, in my third year, the topic was this house believes in the orthodoxy of heresy. So this house believes in the orthodoxy of heresy. And I began by saying, just as heresy exists in the context of orthodoxy, Hindu college exists in the context of St. Stephen's College. And this MUKMEM used to be always an issue of rivalry between Stephen's and Hindu college, and everyone else who participated didn't matter. So half the audience was Hindu college, the other half was St. Stephen's College, and there was space for a few others. And when I said that just as heresy exists in the context of orthodoxy, Hindu college exists in the context of St. Stephen's College, Hindu college just erupted. There were broken chairs. I could barely speak for my allotted 5 minutes. I actually must say that it was fun, but I was also quite unsettled. I mean, it was like for a moment, I just blanked out but it was all that was part of the tradition in some sense, you know, and winning and losing probably would have mattered less than having had the opportunity to take this jibe at Hindu college. And some of those who were shouting the most were some of my best friends in Hindu. And for that, on that day, they said, you are not our friend. You are a person speaking on behalf of St. Stephen's College. They remain some of my best friends, but there were a few broken chairs. And of course, all the professors came and sort of consoled us and things. And so, you know, obviously I did not feature in the 1-2 position, but it didn't matter to me because, and incidentally, the tradition continues. Last year, I went and delivered the commencement speech or the speech at the graduating ceremony, what we in St. Stephen's call the dismissal service. So there I started by saying that I stood in this hall and said this. And in my 30-minute speech, there were a lot of times I got applauses, but the hall erupted again in great joy. So even today, that healthy and sometimes very enjoyable rivalry between Hindu and St. Stephen's continues. So sometimes things change, but some traditions continue. So I was very delighted to see that students who were graduating from Stephen's reacted exactly the same way as we did in 1984, 85.
Of course, one could argue, Jawed, that setting off Hindu-Christian riots is not the most propitious way to start a diplomatic career. It's a good thing, though. You didn't wind up in the IAS. Can you imagine starting these riots in the middle of Uttar Pradesh or Bihar?
No, absolutely.
All right.
That's funny. I didn't think of it that way. Yes.
Good segue into now Mussoorie and thereafter. Now, you told me something which I found quite intriguing, that when you came down from Mussoorie, before you went off to Germany, you did a 6-month stint publishing this, 7-volume thing on doing business in India. Which of course you took over from people like Anderson and PwC. They were making a bit of a hash of it from what I can understand. How did that come about, and did that help make your name within the system?
I think, first of course, Mussoorie was like, heaven and earth, going, and incidentally, and I have to say with some pride for us IIMs, that the first 3 positions at the end of the foundation course, it was all 3 IIMA. So that's,
you don't have to say it, that's understood.
I got the best all-round probationer, but the number 2 and number 3 were all, so, there's something to be said about the institute. Yeah, we finished our training in Mussoorie, and again, there's no training like that because it involves even trekking compulsory and things like that, horse riding and so forth. But we spent 6 months training in Foreign Service Institute, and after which we are supposed to go abroad on our first posting. Since I had a couple of months, so the head of our economic coordination unit asked me if I could sort of help write 1 chapter on market for this 7-volume thing they were bringing out, doing business with India, as part of this new outreach to the global investor community after the reform started. And I said, sure, and I took a jab at it. And frankly, the people were struggling at that stage with defining what it was, and they used the term middle class, which I said was more of a sociological concept. So I said, let's work backwards with numbers of, figures of sales that we have, from toothpaste to bicycles to scooters to cars to everything else that we could sell at that time, and let's look at consuming class rather than as a middle class. And, and then there was a lot of debate. Then the head of NCAER, he said, this is the best and the most accurate way to do it. He was a chief economist there. And that's how it started. And why don't you do the rest of it? Those chapters were on finance, taxation, regulation, all kinds of things. And I actually spent money from my pocket because I didn't know how government approvals are done. So I used to go, look at photo banks, pick up pictures. There were very few to showcase India, then write the script, write the captions. The net result was that, we produced this, and I got my posting was changed from Vienna to Frankfurt, from a place which I was really looking forward to in terms of music and art, to a place which was fundamentally just a banking and financial institution. But it was a great experience. We were able to make presentations on then using Harvard graphics to 70, 80 boards and companies in Germany, do lots of market research, investment analysis. It was great fun, I think, and it was a very exciting moment in India too.
So Jawed, I want to actually deep dive into a couple of other different parts of your foreign policy experience. So the first is Americas. Now, after you did with Germany, you sort of wound up in the Americas division, and then you later came back and ran that division. So altogether, I think you did well over a decade. Yes. With the Americas. If between you and Jaishankar, I think you are the fulcrums of India's America policy over the last 15 years. I think the Clinton visit, the Bush visit, and so on. So, do you want to share with us some of the highlights of, how did India think about this tilt towards, classic non-alignment to now being a little bit more America-aligned? Maybe the nuclear deal happened under your watch, so maybe some insights on that. And how do you feel about this transition?
First of all, yeah, I've spent 13, 14 years doing that. So it started in 1998, just for 98, 99, that cusp. This was after the nuclear tests and when our relationship completely froze. But remember at that point of time, the road had a fork and we could have taken one of the two. It was again the great vision of late Atal Bihari Vajpayee. 3 months after there was the most brutal comprehensive sanctions against India, he stood in New York in Asia Society and said US and India and US are natural allies. So the journey was either we could go down the path of downward spiral or try to see opportunities in this crisis. And remember, throughout the Cold War, we were as what we call estranged democracies. 90s was a horrible period. You remember the Kashmir resolution, sanctions against ISRO, all kinds of things. So the nuclear test really put it into, as Madeleine Albright then said, India has dug itself into a hole. We then started what is very interesting, 16 rounds of Stroop Talbot, Jaswant Singh talks. It was the most fascinating diplomatic conversation you'll ever see. Much of it is absolutely secret now. But we achieved all our objectives. So, you know, I started in 98, end of 98 when there were sanctions, and just before Kargil War. Kargil War was also a turning point. Remember, before that, no one ever spoke about terrorism affecting India. It was about Kashmiri militants, the word terrorism was never used. In fact, there was some sort of romanticizing of a revolutionary spirit of people fighting for freedom, human rights. And I think Kargil began to change all of that. So then we came to 2000, Clinton visit. That was the beginning of normalization of the relationship, step one. Then came President Bush, who was clearly driven by this vision that India is a country of billion people living in democracy and diversity. Why don't we have a relationship with them that should be at least as strong as the one we have with China? And that began the process of change. For 2 years, of course, we were distracted by the 9/11 and aftermath, and India-Pakistan standoff over the parliament attack in Chalm in December 2001. So, but after that, it really took off, and we started saying, okay, we want a strategic partnership. What is it that we need to do? So we had to remove the constraints and the barriers of the past. And from normalizing, that means we are talking to each other, eliminating the constraints. Once you eliminate the constraints, then you begin to build a strategic partnership. So why did we do it? Look, the geopolitics, the world had undergone a tectonic shift in the 99 after the end of the Cold War. And for us, there were very clear objectives. One was that we also had to recalibrate our position, as corporates would do when the environment changed. Second, we wanted to reintegrate into the global order. The global security architecture built around denial regimes was essentially sprung from our 1974 nuclear test. And we had to reintegrate ourselves into the world. Second, we wanted to leverage this relationship to expand our global and geopolitical options in space. Third, we wanted to have access to the best technology. When I say technology, technology is largely dual use, the most sensitive ones. So you can't even get access to technology for civilian space if it's denied to you for military reasons. So space was an example. And then, of course, there was this whole issue of building up our military capabilities. And finally, of course, there was this Asian balance. And remember, while we talk of Asian balance now, if you see the speech delivered by Prime Minister Vajpayee in the US Congress in 2000 September, and I happened to be there at that point of time, he spoke about it then, about the kind of Asia that we want to build in terms that mirrors our values and our interests. So that was the beginning of a journey, and from successive governments in India, from Shri Vajpayee, then Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then Prime Minister Narendra Modi, have built this relationship. Similarly, on the US side, from President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, and now President Trump, they've all kept moving the relationship forward. So it's been a huge transformation, and I think broadly we have achieved the objectives. So it isn't about really what you said, about from non-alignment to tilt towards US. We're really in our corner, and we don't think reflexively in the Cold War terminology of either you're in this camp or that camp. We are actively and proactively engaging all stakeholders to see how best we can navigate this to achieve our both economic and security objectives in the world, and US will be an important partner. The final element in this relationship, and I think it's many of our IIM colleagues will understand this, it was the professionals in India, especially the IT professionals, who opened the window to the possibilities that India offered in the late 80s and 90s. The family links, the professional link, the people-to-people ties are actually very important underpinning of this new relationship.
Jawed, just a quick one. So in your experience, I'm not sure you actually dealt with the Trump administration, but you should have insight. Does it matter whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, or does the personality profile of each president have a lot of bearing on the underlying momentum, or is just a train that's left the station, so it's going to go on regardless?
Let me give you an example. When President Obama was a senator, he had a lot of concerns about the nuclear deal. He was a very strong advocate of non-proliferation. I remember his time in the Senate. And again, I mean, when he became president, he continued to carry that project forward. We had already by then signed the nuclear deal, but there were a lot of other issues that remained to be, covered. So I think we have to look at two things: separate the politics or the person from the institution. I think, sometimes we get lost, as many people do, in the noise of politics, and we don't look at the institutional imperatives and underpinnings that are drivers of the relationship and the circumstances. Each president has understood the value of this relationship and has worked hard. And I think it's also the case with the current president. We sometimes get lost in this whole trade dispute. As he said, and all of us realize we've got to resolve those issues, but there is the overriding, overarching objective, and that is, how do we strengthen this relationship in our mutual interest and in the new world order that is emerging. And nuclear deal, frankly, in many ways, wasn't just about access to nuclear fuel. It wasn't just about access to nuclear technology that was denied to us for 40 years. But it was also about building that strategic trust. That is, a denial regime, whether it was US law or the nuclear suppliers group, could change to accommodate a responsible international stakeholder like India. And that is why it was so important. And that has led to access and led us to look a lot of other things in defense, for example, defense technology, for example, unthinkable, unimaginable progress there as well.
Jawed, I want to switch gears to another country which people don't actually think hard enough about, which is Nepal. But in truth, India's relationship with Nepal is of paramount importance. It is an extremely strategic relationship. And it's a relationship which is somewhat fragile. Nepal sits, between China and India. Sometimes I think they try to play off China and India and so on. You spent some time in Kathmandu. I said you've done this fabulous picture book on Nepal as well. So can you share some insights on your perspective on the India and Nepal story and where you see that going?
Gosh, if you start me on Nepal, we can spend 2 days talking about it.
No, we don't have 2 days.
I've just, actually people ask me what's been your, best posting. And when I say it's Kathmandu, they seem surprised that because, it's been Washington, Berlin, Singapore, and others. No, I mean, it's really, as you said, a very critical relationship. Remember, it's a country with which we have open borders. We have special rights for each other. I mean, people from Nepal can join government service, they can own land, they can work in India. There are many other things that make this relationship very unique. Ties of religion, culture, faith, people marry into each other's families it's very normal. When I was there, I mean, so of course it's 2004 to 2007. I must put that into perspective because Nepal today is very different. Personally, first I must say that I actually really wanted that posting, and I was very delighted to get it because at that time it required a lot of competition for that. Personally, it was really rewarding. As you know, I love trekking, so I had great trekking experiences. I love wildlife, the great wildlife in the Terai and in the higher reaches of Himalaya. This Kathmandu city is a multi-layered city of great traditions, culture, public spaces. 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, hundreds and hundreds of wonderful temples and Buddhist temples and monasteries and viharas surrounded by hills. I mean, again, very cosmopolitan also, as those who might have been there would realize. So personally, it was very rewarding. I experienced great warmth and friendship. Professionally, it was just fascinating. If I tell you that, I landed in Kathmandu, Ghazala and I, on the day Kathmandu was under curfew and under Maoist siege. This is at the peak of Maoist movement in Nepal. So we've had to be escorted from the airport home in police escort. 3 days we were locked inside our house as we are now. And, provisions were sent to us by our embassy. But that was immediately so exciting for me, We've seen a Maoist insurgency and we've seen a king carry out a coup against his own democratic government. And for 1 week, all internet phones, everything was down. If you had to talk to someone, you had to walk across to their place. We saw the Jan Andolan, people's movement, 1 million people on the streets outside in Kathmandu. We saw the fall of monarchy. We saw the end of Maoist movement, the restoration of democracy, and Nepal's move towards a republican multi-party democracy. All this, India was watching this closely. We were in some sense participants, in the process. So it was again a very fascinating period. But other than that, there are issues, just Bihar has 266 rivers flowing from Nepal, 266. 40% of discharge into Ganges comes from. So water and floods and power were a very big and emotive issues there. Water they treat like a national resource. So for us, for me, one again, very fascinating aspect of this was that in monsoons, I would drive along the border, just looking at the flood areas, what do we need to do? We also brought about some seminal change in the way we deal with each other in the issues of water and power. Because 50 years we had nothing moving. And then we changed the paradigm into less government to government and more private sector driven. Because I felt if Nepal government is in control, the asymmetry of India and Nepal will be taken away. And amazing, I was accused by some people in my own government of being too private sector friendly, but I felt that was the only way to go. And we were proved right. Then we got 10 licenses for hydropower projects. Some are in the process of being done because Nepal has institutional constraints as well. But I must tell you one very interesting episode, and this shows the diversity of our job. In 2004, January, on my last tour to the United States during that phase, 99 to 2004, I accompanied External Affairs Minister then Yashwant Sinha to a visit to Washington, DC. And we went to meet President Bush, Secretary Powell, NSA Condoleezza Rice. I remember President Bush pulling my leg because I was taking notes. He says, how can you take notes and drink coffee at the same time? Can you show me? And things. Then, it was my next tour from a headquarter was in Kathmandu, from Kathmandu to the Terai to look at some flood management arrangements. And that was to an area where there had been a Maoist had massacred villages just a month before that, and was a Maoist hotbed. And we were escorted into those river banks. Can you imagine? It's not on villages. It's like you are driving along the rivers to look at embankment. With 2 police vehicles in front, armed guards, about 20 of them, and 2 behind us with another 20, so 40 guys. The whole day you are out there, you're vulnerable, the cell phone wasn't working, so you are completely out of touch with the world. Surrounded by 40 cops, but that is no source of consolation, because when there is a Maoist ambush, these guys, you don't know whether they can save you or not. So the dramatic difference between my last tour to the US from my headquarters in MEA and my first tour out of Kathmandu into the Terai reflected both the contrast and the fascinating experiences we have.
That's fascinating. All right, Jawed, I want to move to the third part. I know we're getting on to the hour, but it would be remiss not to talk about experiences in Prime Minister's office. You had the opportunity to work closely, particularly with Dr. Manmohan Singh and Prime Minister Modi, and I think Pranab Mukherjee as well, and so on. So as you look back, can you tell us a little bit about the insights of what do you find common between leaders of the stature, and what's uniquely different about them?
That's a good question to ask, because again, first thing I must tell you that we are professionals insulated from politics. And I have to say that both Dr. Manmohan Singh and Prime Minister Modi have always insulated us from politics. We were professionals to give professional advice and support. So it really was in some sense a seamless transition. There was a huge difference in style. Of course, I had to again, completely reorient. It wasn't just one government leading and another government coming in. I'd say that it was entirely different India that was coming in. An India that wasn't part really of just the Lutyens, Delhi as before. So it was different, but there are a lot of common elements in it. I'd say one thing that struck me about all of them is their capacity to focus in the present, 100%. Whether there's a storm in the parliament, you're sitting with Dr. Manmohan Singh, he listens to you with rapt attention, unmoved. With Prime Minister Modi, his power of concentration, his power of listening, I cannot tell you how it's impossible to describe it. You can sit with him for 3 hours, 4 hours and talk. He's listening to you, absorbing everything, remembering everything. At the end of 3 hours, he can ask you some really unsettling and sharp questions with deep insights. And those 3 hours, he's like, as though the world has come to a standstill. If he's meeting you for 20 minutes, those 20 minutes are yours. Everything else in the world stops. The capacity to be in the present, capacity to distill what is important from what is not. That is something that always struck me. A second is that, or both of them, and in fact, even President Pranab Mukherjee, whom I actually had the chance to interact when he was finance minister, is there just indefatigable stamina and spirit. They can work just endless hours, day in and day out, through sometimes very, very tiring political situations, governance issues, etc. So it's always been, and they were all, I found, very supportive, gave you a lot of space. And that's important, because if you're not sure of yourself, not sure of the support and backing that you get from your bosses, it'll be hard for us to operate in those very, very extremely demanding situations. I mean, it was like there was no social life, there was no public life, 7 days a week. You were in office, whether it was the previous government or the government after that. Yeah, so there are a lot of common things that you learn. And I always think that, can we imbibe some of those in our life? Because ultimately it's really about management.
How about any notable distinction or difference in their style?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, let me start by saying, you know, I had to sort of dive deep into my my school days to revive my
Hindi,
and to start writing in Hindi also. And I think, you know, one is more oral, and the other was more written. One had come through a sort of a bureaucratic process and things. The other is really, really political. I'd say in different ways, you know, and I mean, of course, Prime Minister Modi is just an amazing communicator. He can also...
So actually, I was going to go there, Jawed. So he is an awesome speaker. And from what I understand, you wrote many of his speeches, and in English and in Hindi and so on. And sometimes he delivered some of these English speakers. Now, he's not a natural English speaker, but his delivery of the English speeches also was extraordinary. How did he prepare for it, and how did he help him prepare for all of these speeches?
No, let me say this. First, I think his communication skills and oratory skills are just unbelievable. He keeps surprising you with how he can push himself, his boundaries. Again, I mean, without getting into, you know, the politics and all of that, he is a remarkable person in terms of saying, okay, I'm not satisfied with this. I remember a time when we were going to Australia, and I said, sir, we can do this. And he was to speak in the Australian Parliament. Any of you can Google and hear that speech, or hear the speech he delivered in Afghanistan Parliament on December 25th. You see he said, no, I'll do it in English. And he said, why? He said, look, I want to speak to the audience, and I don't want somebody else's voice doing that. And I can tell you his oratorial skills, even in English. And he was not a person who was, in a sense, saying that, you know, oh, I'm going to speak in Hindi to show how important Hindi is. When we went to Malaysia and we were speaking to the Indian community there, again in November 2015, he said, look, this is essentially a Tamil audience. So can you imagine? He spoke for 50 minutes in English to a Tamil audience, which understood only English, emoted exactly the same way as he would do in Hindi. And, you know, and incidentally, I've seen him in private carry out perfectly normal, fine conversation on very complex subjects in English too, when he wants to be very precise in his articulation, and he doesn't want any nuances to get lost on through a translation process. So, so I think this is one thing I've always found, that his ability to constantly challenge himself, push boundaries, constantly want to learn, ask questions. He always likes to get to the bottom of things. And he doesn't hesitate to say, look, I haven't got it. Just, can you do it again? Can we understand this again? And once he does it, then he has his own ideas about how to do it, what are new things we can add into it. And you know, his capacity to distill what is important, the intonation, the tone, everything he picks up instinctively.
Yeah, if I remember, you told me once that he practiced his intonation and tone in Hindi and then translated it. Is there something like that?
No, nothing of that kind. His thing was that he used to often make a decision at the last minute whether to speak in Hindi or English. And I tell you, he is very sensitive about the language issue. We were going to SAARC summit in 2014. in November in Kathmandu. And he said, look, in Kathmandu, I'll speak in Hindi. Obviously, people understand Hindi. And then one day before, he said, what do people, what are the other SAARC leaders going to do? So I said, they'll speak in English. So he said, I don't want to be the one imposing Hindi on them. I love the language, yes, and I think I'm very proud of it, but I do not want to make it appear that India is the largest country in SAARC and, you know, we are indifferent to others and that we don't speak, we can't speak it. So he then overnight changed it. So, you know, sometimes we would, he would make up his mind at the very end, depending on the audience. I mean, and that's again, a high degree of sensitivity to the audience, to the environment and to the circumstances. And that shows really his communication ability and how he wants to relate to people.
So let me ask you a harder question, a little sensitive, and I haven't prepped on it, but nevertheless, you said, you know, as bureaucracy, we're generally insulated from politics. How about the religion factor? As a Muslim, did you feel ever uncomfortable in any of the administrations? Or were you completely insulated from that as well?
Simple, it never even occurred to me. It never occurred to me in these 3 decades. Gosh, we're all really getting on, huh? That it was a factor. It never was, it never will be. And I can tell you that in this government also, I handled some of the most sensitive assignments. And I don't think anybody looked at it. I don't think anybody, and these years that I worked there, that never was, I've never been, when I was in office, ever felt conscious of identities, and not at any of my colleagues. I mean, it just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And it didn't exist for me, certainly, with anyone, and certainly with, you know, the prime ministers I worked with and the others I worked with. When receive the maximum level of trust anyone can.
So I just, you know, in the few minutes we have before I look for questions, I want to move quickly to Singapore. You told me, you know, some months ago, after your Paris move got announced, you had the opportunity to sit with the ESM. Actually, he asked you out and asked you for your thoughts on, you know, Singapore, India, what Singapore could be doing differently. I want to also add to that the other side. What could India be doing differently? I guess my context is this, that, you know, we have a look east policy. We both recognize that we're very important for each other. For Singapore, being able to balance the other interests in the region with the India interests is obviously of profound importance. For India, as it looks at look east, Singapore is a natural partner, a gateway to the region. Nevertheless, my own sense is, you know, while we make progress, it's nowhere near as fulfilled as it could be. So what are your insights and thoughts at the end of 3-4 years? What is working well? What could we do better? What insights do you have?
Yeah, no, it's a good, very good question. And I think it's very important. First, you know, you asked about 2 things, you know, one about India, Singapore, and, you know, what could be both doing more to realize the full potential. And what I think about Singapore, you know, 3.5 years, that's what ESM asked me, and what are the challenges ahead. Let me deal with the first one. And I think it's important. One is that, you know, Singapore was a startup nation. Now it's like a mature state, like a startup turning into a large corporate. It has, that throws up its own set of challenges. You can become risk averse. You can become very process driven, rules driven. You get too wedded to your own keys to success in the past. And, you know, and you say, this is what has worked for me. So as I always say, that every success has its seeds of failure within it, unless you can remove it. I think demography is going to be a big challenge. The issue of, you know, being a global city, and yet dilemmas about getting the best global pool of talent in, the trade-off between economic imperatives and social compulsions. These sorts of issues they'll have to deal with, especially as a new generation of leaders take over. And then the world is not going to be as kind a place, as nice a place as it was, navigating through new power rivalries between 2 very close friends of Singapore, US and China, the fraying ASEAN unity, which throws up its own challenges for the buffer that ASEAN states have around themselves, the deglobalization that is starting, the issue of growth versus redistribution, which Piyush, you spoke so eloquently about in the last IIMChat we had here. These issues will be, they'll have to face the ability of the new generation of leaders See, the marginal gains every year is going to be very different from 60s and 70s. So marginal improvements in life. So the ability to communicate to people about what they are doing, the social compact, the trust between leaders and the people here is going to be a very important factor. Having said that, I have to say there are some extraordinary strengths in this country, and it is the success. You know, people say it's a small country and therefore it succeeds. I think it's much easier to fail as a small state than to succeed as a small state. I mean, you could become irrelevant and just be washed away. One, of course, is that it's investment in human resources. I mean, it's proven time and again. You don't have economic, natural resources. It's investment in people, skills, education, in health, everything that brings a nation what it can do. If you have the right team, as you have in the corporate sector, you can achieve great things. Right policies, openness to the world. I mean, it's, as I said, it's a nation that has opened its arms to the world and held together in tight embrace of its diversity. I think that's been a great strength, constantly avoiding, you know, sort of constantly looking ahead. Infrastructure is the most obvious thing, but it's really the policies, the thinking ahead. But I'd say something which is much more intangible, and that is the extraordinary harmony and understanding in its, you know, multiracial and multi-religious, multicultural diversity. It's not easy to achieve, and it has achieved it by two fundamental strategies. One is deterrence, that there is no role and no scope in this country to get into issues of religion and identity, or to prove you're superior to someone, or speak a language that hurts sentiments of others, or create rifts. That's one. The second, but that's not good enough. The second is their constant effort in this country to forge a sense of a common identity woven around the different cultural streams. So, you know, when I go to various places of worship, and I go to different, I see ministers and leaders from different faiths joining in it. And right from the school onwards, this is being constantly nurtured. It's not easy because human beings have instincts, and to constantly work to overcome it is a great source of strength and a great asset, particularly in these times in the world. So I think it has some enormous strengths, and I'm quite confident that even as we emerge out of this pandemic situation, Singapore will be able to adapt itself, be on the forefront digitally, educationally, research and development. And I hope that what it was before, it was efficiency and quality driven. I want to see Singapore become really innovation driven. It isn't that you do something that others do better or more beautifully, but that you do some things others haven't done. You create new value propositions for the rest of the world. Because I think we're at that takeoff stage here in Singapore where we can achieve that. And that will be a great determinant of its success in the future. The second part I'll quickly say, I think India and Singapore have a great relationship. I think very few people realize we focus too much on what we haven't done in economic field. But we've got one of the strongest defense partnerships both of us have with any country. And that's something which we can talk about later. Really a reflection of enormous confidence. We do stuff with Singapore we don't do with any country. And Singapore does stuff with us that they barely do with anyone in the realm. We're doing some great stuff now in technology. I mean, Singapore is the first place where we launched RuPay and BHIM QR. We're looking at, you know, interoperability of our systems. Piyush, Sanjeev, all of them are integral to the thinking process and the drivers behind this. So I think we have a great story to create something in the realm of digital economy, digital innovation and technology, not just for cutting edge technology, but also offering solutions to the world for inclusion, empowerment, for development. We have done some work on that in India, they have done in Singapore. And together, I think we can really offer something new and enhance and harness the power of technology. I'd say that we have to do a lot in terms of bringing our two countries more together in the economic domain. We have to make some regulatory issues, deal with regulatory issues. Singapore will have to get over some of the hesitation. And I think the government has rightly signaled to the industry that, and the business, that, you know, one of the three priorities for them would be India, ASEAN, and China going into the future. And again, I'd say that one of the strongest bridges that we have, the strongest asset that we have is this absolutely fascinating, accomplished, talented, and connected pool diaspora that we have, especially the professional diaspora. I think if we on both sides can tap into their thinking, into their management skills and in their ability to connect, we would achieve great heights because, you know, this is one of the most warm political relationships you will see. I mean, it's amazing how ministers can WhatsApp each other between our two countries, and how there's no contest, no claims, no hesitations, no doubts in this relationship. So for us, and I'd say finally that when we look towards the East, intellectually, economically, diplomatically, politically, and in security terms, Singapore is a great bridge. Similarly, there is something very precious we have, and which is that we both see the world in the same way. We both believe in rule of law, in democratic principles, in small and large states being sovereign and equal. And we both want this region to be free from great power rivalry or domination by one or the other country. And this is an important driver beyond the metrics of trade, investment, tourism, etc. That is going to be a key driver for the strategic partnership. And we'll count on people like you to take this to greater heights.
Jawed, I want to take the next few minutes, maybe 10, 12 minutes, looking through some of the questions. And some of the questions are, you know, are you Prime Minister Modi's blue-eyed boy and what makes you that, and so on. But the question which I see resonance with is around China. So the question which says, from Indranil, how will India's strategic interests evolve, particularly given China's regional ambitions? There is another question which is also China-centric. Where are the relationships between India, China, Singapore, China, going from here in the New World Order? And there is yet another question which says, should we lean towards the US camp or should we lean towards the China camp as we look at potentially a bipolar world? And finally, one from Anand Rao, China seems to be trying to envelope India through Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, largely through the financial route. How can India neutralize this? So what is your perspective? How does India think about China? What is the right way to play that game?
Gosh, yeah, there's a whole set of very important questions. Let me start with the perspective on a bipolar world. First, I'd like to say that the way the world is evolving, again, we have to perhaps look beyond our 20th century mindsets. That period of history was some sort of an extraordinary period in the world. You know, 70 years, 50 years, 60 years. If you look at the whole span of human history, it was rarely a moment when you had two camps, the world divided into two camps. And it doesn't mean that when we get into the 21st century, we are continuing to face the same world order. And therefore, if we start thinking like that, then our strategic responses will be based on that. What I think it's going to happen is going to be a far more fluid situation, a world in which there will be coexistence of major and leading powers. There will be coexistence of economic systems, of political systems, social norms, societal arrangements, etc. And there will be this constant pull and pressure, constant fluid alignments. This is the way I think, especially we'll have to see how it evolves after the current crisis. So let us not for a moment, whether it ends that way or no, but our current thinking cannot be dictated by extrapolating 20th century into the 21st century. India is in its own corner. Look, we are a nation of 1.3 billion people. We have a lot of economic challenges. But we are not a country that is going to ever be saying, okay, we are leaning towards one or the other. We want to be able to create the geopolitical and global economic space in which we can achieve two fundamental objectives. One is to accelerate economic development and progress, which means access to market resources, investments, technology. And the second is to secure an environment, keep a peaceful periphery, secure our environment and maritime domain also, which will also help achieve our economic objectives. So I think that that the world we are entering is not going to be, so we have to be nimble, we have to be fleet-footed, we have to be flexible and see what is in our best interest. And that does not mean that we will be on one or the other. And we cannot be dictated by that if we are having a relationship with the United States, it has to be on its own merit. And we can't look over our shoulder and say, will it displease China? Or we have an engagement with China and say, look over our shoulders and say, will it make China, US upset or Russia upset? Look, Russia is going to remain an important player despite shrinking economy. It has the political will to do so. There are big countries like Indonesia, India, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. They're all going to play a role, ASEAN as a whole. France, Europe is looking at a future in which it wants to do things independently. So we will see. And so we are, our policies are actually geared towards that. And so let us not reduce it to a binary. As far as our relations with China is concerned, I mean, we try to maintain and expand the areas of cooperation, maintain a sort of a communication. Prime Minister, imagine the amount of time he spends talking to President Xi in these informal settings. At all levels, we do that. But we have obvious challenges. There are challenges which are bilateral in nature. There are challenges of geopolitical nature in the sense of our periphery, their periphery. And that is actually a reflection of the mistrust or the lack of confidence in each other. Because this is now, in a global world, people are going to reach into each other's periphery. I don't think they like us being in South China Sea, or they like us engaging with Vietnam, or they would be very happy with the relationship we have with Singapore, for example. Similarly, we'll have concerns about what they're doing in our neighborhood. I mean, China-Pakistan relationship is a separate story, and it has a different connotation altogether, and a very vital security issue for us. But we are actually dealing with it, and I mean, I can't go into too much detail on that, but I'd say this, that even in our neighborhood, it isn't just finance that you can buy trust and you can buy people's confidence. There are other levers of power. There are other levers of relationship that matter. And I've seen that in the Indian Ocean region, in many other island nations, where people have offered more, but countries have stuck to us. And we see that now in some of our neighboring countries as well. So it's a complex world. South Asia is no longer that forgotten backyard, which is, it is an area where other countries are present, China, US, etc. Each of these countries have plurality of politics in them, so that makes it easy to exploit these differences. But I think we are paying attention to it. And I'd say this, that you can't simply, if money was the only way you could buy off countries, then US would have had the best of cooperation from Pakistan. Remember, through the 2000 and after, US has spent enormous amount of monies, but it still found Osama bin Laden and many others home there. And so many of those insurgents were killing American soldiers in Afghanistan, were actually taking refuge in Pakistan. And every year the US kept increasing the assistance it gave until very recently. So I think you have to see this in a more complex and nuanced way. And we are entering perhaps a return to history in the sense that it will be a far more complex and fluid world.
Hi, Jawed. Maybe one more question or theme. And that's really around how India handles PR, and particularly how the Foreign Ministry, Foreign Affairs is a part of that. So a specific question from Sandeep Dhingra. One of the issues about India has been the constant barrage of negative press reports by the like of BBC, Washington Post, New York Times, etc. Why is the government so reluctant to engage with foreign media and try to get them to present a more objective picture? Did you engage a lot with the media yourself? And then the top most voted question, I think, from Suresh Shankar, which is, without getting political, why does it seem that the Indian government, especially finance ministry, is totally missing in action? There's total silence compared to the robust response in other countries. I think this is referring also to the size of the stimulus, which of course is a function of financial resources. But in general, do we need to be more active in terms of public relations, media management, and the perception?
It's a very good question. And I'm glad someone has asked this, because I tell you this, that we do pay attention. But I mean, I can talk about my own experience here, but I'd rather not get into it, because sometimes there are very deep-seated biases, deep-seated positions. And it may be the result of the positions and political judgments and views and proclivities of journalists, or it may be the eyes through which you look at issues. But I'd say that a large number of Western media continues to look at things as they did during the Cold War period, where for some reason they thought we were on the other side of the great moral divide, as they used to, between the liberal and the other order. And that has persisted. And I can tell you that in so many of the coverage, no matter how many facts you present, I mean, the lens you choose to look at it can be very different. Now, what do you do about it? You can engage with them. You can continue to go and talk to them. But you see, in many countries, and I don't want to name a couple of very large countries, they take some very punitive steps, which we do not, and we should not be. And that is, ban people, or we say that, so-and-so journalists can't come in, etc. And so there is that little bit of liberty they also enjoy on that count. But I'd say that it sometimes becomes very difficult. Now, let us also for a moment pause and ask ourselves this question. Why is it that it is so important to us what BBC thinks, and why is it so important to us what New York Times or Washington Post write? I know if people feel that it's important. Does it affect or influence our ability to deal with the business and governments that we deal with? So far, it hasn't. I mean, what New York Times writes or Washington Post writes doesn't affect the way United States deals with us or we deal with the United States, and so is the case with the UK. I mean, so I think governments also and businesses also learn to sift through this. In a public perception, it may be different. But let us not also get to, it's like saying, I mean, somebody won a Nobel Prize, God, that is the ultimate achievement. Maybe one day, and see, this is what happens when there is a dominance of economic, military, political power for a period of time. There is also the dominance of colonization of mind. There are journalists in Singapore working for Straits Times who say that they only believe what is said in BBC, New York Times, etc., as to be the truth, even when it comes to their own countries. So I think this is a huge challenge for all of us. And there are now, of course, many different mediums through which you can communicate to the people, and people are doing that.
Jawed, as we get to the bottom of the hour.
What was the last question about this finance ministry? Now,
all right.
Yeah, just to I mean, it's not deliberately that I didn't answer that question. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. There are financial constraints. And if you look at the accumulated financial constraints of central government and state governments, there is. The range of choices we have is somewhat limited. The reserves we can dip into is not particularly great. But we have to work within that framework. So the first step in that is to see if we can cushion the most painful impact of the current great disruption. And then we will see how we build, I mean, is this an opportunity for some major reforms that catalyzes investment in human resources, as well as in healthcare and education, and in letting businesses flourish. So I'm hoping that this should be an opportunity that the government would seize and really accelerate some major reforms and see the energy in the economy returning with strong employment potential and investment in human resources, health, education, etc.
All right, I was going to say, we're getting to the bottom of the hour, actually, we overshot our time. So I'm going to, wind up with just switching back to a little bit of a more personal dimension. And there's a question here from Mohit Khurana, which says, Dear Jawed, what does your typical day look like? What is the secret of your energy level and positive spirit? Now, having known you, I think part of the answer is Ghazala. I think certainly our early morning bird watching and nature trips are to do with her.
Yeah.
But I want to twist that question a little bit. I was struck by, how much time you and Ghazala have to spend apart. Well, she's in Uttarkashi with a PhD, you're here. Now you're going to go to, Paris. It might be challenging. What does the future hold for Jawed Ashraf? What do you see yourself doing this assignment, the next assignment? How do you see life unfolding from here?
But first of all, you rightly mentioned, I mean, Ghazala has been a source of great strength and support. I mean, she's an extraordinary professional herself, done a great deal of work in ecology and environment. She's written books, published many research papers. She has a great PhD from Duke and very committed. And she maintains a very healthy distance from the trappings of government, as you might have seen, doesn't take my role very seriously, doesn't.
I can say that.
Doesn't take herself as, a spouse of an ambassador at all seriously. So that's very good. And she is never afraid to tell me what's wrong with government, with us. And some of the harshest criticism I hear about our work comes at home and in diluted form. I really respect the work that she does and that what she's doing now in Uttarakhand with forest ecology, biodiversity, climate change, and creating livelihood around ecotourism for villages. And I found that the level of interest and enthusiasm among kids to learn about birds and then become bird guides or set up homestay facilities, it's so beautiful. And that kind of a model can actually create alternatives to agriculture. So, so she is understanding. I think I sometimes spend endless hours at work. I bring work home and work till I go to sleep, which is not a good habit. But I'm trying to shake that off also and not spend weekends, in office, or it doesn't happen. So she's been very understanding, and but the times that we have, we really enjoy talking about everything else in the world and about why we share, videos on wildlife and things. And so that's good. And the energy, I think I just enjoy the work I do, and there's great diversity, richness. People, are a great source of energy. And in Singapore, I'd say that a lot of that energy comes from people, friends like you, people, the great Indian community, the great professional diaspora, Singapore itself, their leadership. It makes you believe in possibilities. It makes you believe that there are things you can do. And when you get that support, it gives you energy. You've got a great team in office, small, like Singapore, but full of bundle of energy. So I think enjoying what you do, the diversity, the richness, tapping into the energy that people bring. And I think every day I feel like when I meet people, I learn something from them. I get excited by what they're doing. There's nothing more exciting than talking to youngsters in startups or innovation space. They just blow your mind and you feel like doing something with them and things. So this is what keeps us going. This from, a typical day could be politics, diplomacy, defense, strategic, crisis relating to people, service and counselor. And I think fundamentally what I've always told my people is that we have to be very sensitive in dealing with people, as whoever comes to us thinks his or her problem is the most unique, most important. For you, it may be the 50th problem of the day. Swallow whatever feelings you may have and just be nice to them, even if you have to sort of say no, reassure them, explain to them, but at least make them. So I think this is something which we try to do over here, and that makes you feel really good. Looking ahead, I think I'm looking ahead to going to Paris. France is one of our, I'd say, top 3 relationships now. It's a huge strategic partnership in every sense of the word. They are one of our steadiest, even after the 98 nuclear tests, when the world shunned us, France stood by us. They continue to be a very important partner in every area, from technology and investment and trade to defense, UN Security Council, on Indo-Pacific region, maritime security, space, nuclear, everything. They are a great relationship that we have. So I'm looking forward to going there, but also to the possibilities that we in service have of enjoying and really seeing the cities very closely, the places we live in, which is, what led me to do this book on Kathmandu also, A Day in the Life of Kathmandu, as a tribute to a city that I loved after the earthquake. So we're looking to both at a personal level and a professional level to our next posting.
So there's one add-on question there saying, are you going to join politics like Jaishankar?
Well, at this point of time, I can say that I don't have any thoughts in that direction. I don't know whether I have a personality, whether I have the aptitude or the temperament for it, or whether sometimes I think whether I'll go to the hills and, work with Fazala on some of the biodiversity issues.
Okay, that's my vote, because I want to get to Uttarakhand with you guys.
Yeah.
All right, Jawed, we're going to call it quits.
Yeah,
thank you for, just spending so much time. I know you're awfully busy, but more than the time, thank you for being so open and honest with your experiences and your sensibilities about a lot of things. It's been fascinating for me. I've known some of this. I learned a few more things today. I'm sure it's been fascinating for everybody else on this chat. And I think I speak for all of us people from the IIM fraternity when I say we are just amazingly, immensely proud of you as an alum. You really left footprints over here. We will miss you, but you should know that Singapore will always be home. You have a lot of friends and family in Singapore, and we look forward to welcoming you guys back regularly to come and visit and be part of the community again. So as you, I don't know when you're going to head off given Corona, it might not happen for a few weeks, a month. So we'll hopefully see you if the lockdown's over. But if you do sneak out without a lot of us getting to see you again, bon voyage and all the best.
Well, thank you. I must say that, you know, Singapore, nobody leaves Singapore. I've seen in my predecessors, Singapore becomes part of you, and I look forward to coming back. But I must say that I'm so immensely proud of the IIM alumni over here. It's been such a splendid experience working with them and with all of you. You've given us so much energy and so much insights and so much strength over here, all of you. And so these friendships will obviously last forever. Look forward to remaining in touch. We're welcoming some of you into the splendid India House in the heart of Paris, and to also coming back and spending time here in this wonderful city. Thank you.
So,
all right, Sanjeev, Subra, all yours.
Yeah, so Jawed and Piyush, it's been a really fascinating conversation. So Piyush, as usual, you've done a fabulous job of moderating, guiding the conversation, needling when there was a needling to be done, and so on. So it's been fascinating. And Jawed, you know, we've known each other not for too long. I mean, late 2016, but it feels as though we've known each other for quite a long period of time.
Very
so
true.
It is a great friendship that we have developed. Looking forward to continuing this as you move on to your other assignments. The Inspreneur journey that we sort of began together is something maybe you can carry that into France as well. So perhaps
India, Singapore, France, Inspreneur. That's the next.
The name itself sounds a little bit French, so I think you can.
You just say or something like that.
So you can take it there, but and it's not farewell yet, as Piyush was saying.
Yes.
Looking forward to at least a few more weeks of your stay here. We've been planning a farewell, a physical farewell. Hopefully the circuit breaker ends soon, so that at least a small number of us can meet with you. So once again, thanks very much for all that you've done, not just for the IIM alumni community, but the Indian community in general, professional community specifically. Looking forward to staying in touch and meet you very soon, and wishing you huge success in your, not just in your next assignment, anything else that you may choose to do. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks Subratu, and thanks Sanjeev. You've been a great friend starting from 2017 when we, just after I came, within a week we met and we worked so closely together. Look forward to continuing this partnership and friendship. And Subra, thank you again. It's just wonderful to have worked with you and to have known all of you here.
Thank you so much. So with that, we bring this IIMChat to a close. So thank you, audience, for your participation and your questions as well. And if you have any specific suggestions for future topics, speakers, and so on, please do let us know. So thanks again. And
just one comment to end this wonderful session with. When we sent out the invitations, we said, you can expect a scintillating conversations. And thank you, Jawed and Piyush. You delivered absolutely what we wanted. Absolutely and more.
Well said, Subra.
All credit to Piyush.
You're kidding me. You're the guys who gave the answers. I just asked the question.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.